to the first of our Tiny Trainings. I'm Deborah DeBoer, the Director of Professional Development, and my guest today, or my cohort today, is actually going to be Jeff Lasky. The Tiny Trainings are designed to give you, within 5 or 10 minutes, an idea or a little bit better skill than you had for doing the everyday ordinary things. Today, we're going to talk about meetings and Zoom meetings in particular. And the very first point, and I think truly the most important part of any meeting, I'm going to hand off to Jeff.
Thanks, Deborah. And I'm going to talk about something that may not just be important for meetings, but for life. But all right, I'll keep it to meetings today. And we're going to talk about purpose. So before you schedule the meeting, before you decide how you're going to get together with somebody, and I know it sounds like a simple thing or something that you already do, but be purposeful about finding the purpose for the meeting. Be very direct about it, very focused about it, and just say, okay, look, there's the reason we're having this meeting is this. And do that with every single meeting that you do the rest of your life. And I'm telling you, it's just going to make it made the biggest change in the world for me. Because the one thing that I don't think any of us want or need to do is just kind of like show up at meetings that happen just because they're supposed to. So what do you think of that, Deborah?
I love that. It actually brings to mind one of the tenets that I've had in my training for years. And whenever I start to think about what I'm going to teach, what I'm going to tell someone, it's just this: start with the outcome in mind and work your way backwards. It works so much more effectively for that. It finds that everything falls into place much more easily when you start with the purpose of the meeting or the end in mind. I have some other things that I want to talk about that are more technical things for a Zoom meeting. Number one, you have to decide on what time you're going to do it. So you need to figure out when the people you're inviting to the meeting, when it's convenient for them. You need to schedule the meeting. I've had a couple of experiences now where people have invited me to meetings, but I never get the Zoom invite to the meeting. Be careful that you do that. It also probably does you well if you're having a meeting to send a second invite to the Zoom meeting closer to when the meeting actually occurs. If possible, don't do more than hour-long meetings. By the end of an hour, people are going, oh. You've got to be really careful. And if you're going to do a meeting that's longer than an hour is when you call a break and say, walk away, go get a coffee, go to the bathroom, go do whatever you need to do, but get up from your computer and come back 10 minutes later. All right. Once the meeting begins, enter early because you want to see what you look like. Gives you a chance to fix the bump in your hair. You want to see that everything is working. We had one fabulous meeting where Zoom failed us. We had 25 people coming and Zoom failed, and we had to have an alternate plan. So I would also say, when you're doing these kind of meetings, plan B is a good thing to have. What's your alternate if the technology fails, if the cable connections or the internet connections fail? Another thing that you want to be very careful of is you want to be careful of the lighting. You want to make sure that you look like a normal person, that you are not a silhouette. And you also want to have the time to say to the people who are in the meeting, hey, Jeff, I would like to see your face instead of just your silhouette. I'd really like to know that it's you.
No,
back to you, Jeff.
Yeah, and that's great information. And speaking of all those kind of technical issues in terms of how things look, I want to talk for a second about the chair of the meeting, the person that's running the meeting, and them setting a tone, setting a pace for the meeting. It's their meeting. That's what your job is. Your job as the chair isn't to, get a certain result. Your job is to facilitate everybody coming to a result together, if that makes any sense. And so, and I'm just going to mention for a second Robert's Rules of Order, because there's a commitment to Robert's Rules of Order. As an association, we're required to follow Robert's Rules of Order in our meetings. But when you've got 900 people in a room, like at the National Association of Realtors board meeting, it's critical that you have Robert's Rules of Order in place, or you wouldn't be able to get any business done. But when you have 5 people or 10 people or 15 people in a meeting, it doesn't necessarily seem like you really need to have that in place, right? Well, let me suggest to you this. When you go into these meetings as the chair, and this is the only thing I'm going to ask you off the top to follow. When I say the grasp that you need to have of Robert's Rules of Order is that whenever you go into a topic and you get the sense immediately that somebody has a feeling one way or another about how they want it to go, ask for the motion and ask for the second, and then go into discussion. Okay, so it's motion, seconded, go into discussion. Because what happens for most people, especially those who aren't experienced, is you have a whole bunch of discussion, but nobody's ever put a motion on the floor. So you're not sure if somebody really wants to have something done a certain way or not. So even if you're not, people aren't convinced that the motion's going to pass, you still want to get that motion out there on the floor. See if there's a second, because if there's not a second, then obviously what that person wants to get accomplished isn't going to pass. So you wait, get a motion, get a second, and then have that full breadth of discussion where you'll find that you get everything out and then you have the vote on the motion. So does that make sense, Deborah?
That is lovely. That is the most concise definition of how to run a meeting that I ever heard, because Robert's Rules of Order for most people is a terrifying thing. It's a chart. It's a chart with like 16 million things you have to follow. I love that. Motion, second, discussion. How easy is that to run a meeting that way? So thank you, Jeff.
Oh, you're welcome.
One of the other things I think we've been really struggling with, all of us who this last few months have had to learn to do Zoom, is how to personalize it, how to make it feel more like we're sitting next to each other in a meeting, or we're sitting next to each other in a classroom, or we can see each other. I am going to strongly suggest, even if the people in the meeting know each other, you have them introduce each other all over again. Have them introduce each other, have them tell an interesting fact about each other, but somehow or another, re-energize the group as a group, pull them together by their introductions, so that I say, hey, Jeff, it's so nice to see you again across boxes, is almost as though as I was saying it to you across the desk. That makes such an incredible difference. I know you can see people's names, but that introduction and getting that one personal fact. How long have you been in real estate? What company are you with? How are you doing in the pandemic? Make a personal touch in that beginning. I also am going to tell you that I think it's really critically important that you have people stay on camera. I've been in this morning alone, I was in a meeting and I was looking at people's PowerPoints and they were just talking behind the PowerPoints. It was exhausting. I want to see your face when we're in a meeting, because I want to know that Jeff is nodding at me right now. I want to know who's bored, who's not bored, who's having a good time. I want to look at the people on the screen. So make one of the conditions of your meetings that if you're going to come to the meeting, I need to see you. You need to stay on camera. You can't just be turning a picture of yourself on, the little frame with the picture of you and just doing that. You need to stay on camera, and it needs to be kind of one of the rules of your meeting.
Yeah, and I'm going to expand upon that a bit further, Deborah, when as the chair, and keeping in mind chairing the meeting and what is it that we're trying to accomplish, right? We have a purpose here. Well, the purpose isn't to just ramrod through something that you want to have done. As the chair, you want to get a consensus of the group, which eventually results in motions, right? That are
Yes.
are, conclusions, what you drive forward with. And so when you have people on screen, okay, it enables you as the chair to make sure that everybody participates. Now, when I say that, it doesn't mean that in every single discussion, everybody has to be heard necessarily, though that's a judgment call, right? But certainly, and this is something I favor, that if I'm in a discussion about a particular issue, a couple of people talk, and then you get to the end of it, and there are a couple of people you haven't heard from, I have no issue at that point in time, as the chair, saying, okay, well, before we proceed to vote on the motion, Deborah, I haven't heard from you. Is there anything that you want to add to our discussion? Simple as that. Now, some people are shy and you're giving them an imprimatur now to jump in. You're giving them a way for them to come in and to say whatever it is that they're going to say. Oftentimes people will say, oh, I don't have anything to say, or they'll say, well, I feel kind of dumb saying this, but you've at least given them a way to do it. And you can encourage people if you feel that they are shy or that they may feel stupid in saying something, you can say to them, hey, Bill, look, I haven't heard anything from you on this yet. Maybe you don't feel like you have anything to contribute, but I think you might. So why don't you say what's on your mind, whatever it is, and let's see if it contributes to the discussion. Something like that, right? So we're getting everybody to contribute. And what that does not only is give you the best result because you're hearing from everybody, but it stops this chatter outside of the committee that, well, I never get my voice heard. Well, no,
Yes, it does.
pull it out, and even if we've had to pull it out from you. So a couple of key points here. Yeah, in your committee meetings, make sure everybody's on screen. And as the chair, the other thing I want to mention too, Deborah, is we're always cognizant about letting one person just dominate the conversation, right? And again, politely, there could be a point where you might say, oh, hey, Bradley, we've heard a lot from you about this particular topic. I'd like to make sure we hear from everybody. That kind of thing, again, in a polite way to make sure that everybody participates. I think that's really good.
I'm going to tell you from an instructor's point of view, a really practical thing as well. If every so often I just call on someone unexpectedly, it sort of makes everyone pay a little more attention and stay in the moment with us. They don't get so distracted by their phone, whatever other work they're looking at, whatever else is going on. They know they might be asked for their opinion or their contribution. So it kind of helps a little with that. And I can't stress the amount of using names. And you'll find this amusing with my name, with the whole issue that we've had with my name. I think when people come on screen, and I get a lot of people, particularly in classes, who have unusual names, I will say, pronounce your name for me. Tell me how to say your name. And then I frantically write it down phonetically where I am so I can say it again. But the use of people's names and the name they want to be called by is very important in meetings.
Terrific. Yeah. And so what we're talking about here today, right, are all these different tips, all these ways of making people feel important and feeling that they can contribute. So I want to throw in one other thing here, and that is that a part of a purposeful meeting and a part of doing things the way that you've described, Deborah, we have to make sure that everybody understands how much we respect their time and how much we respect their contributions, right? So I'm really, whether it's a staff meeting, whether it's meetings with our volunteers, I'm a real stickler to watching the clock. I make sure that, if I say we're going to have an hour, it's an hour. If I say it's going to be a half hour, it's a half hour. You might say, what if you don't get all the business taken care of? Well, then, and there's certainly, if there's urgent matters that you might need a little extra time for, you can always ask the group for more time. But usually you would schedule another meeting at another point in time, because I think the key issue is you want to have everybody in, fresh, doing this stuff. So don't be afraid as the chair, or if you have somebody there taking notes for you as an example, don't be afraid to have a clock watcher. Don't be afraid to have somebody say, okay, we've got a half hour left, or all right, we're down, we only have 5 minutes left. And I think people respect that. They respect the fact that you respect their time.
I think it's important that you respect that time. You reminded me of something that I want to add too, that we should have added maybe in the beginning, but you reminded me. If you are the chair of the event, have someone else taking notes, because you're going to need to memorialize whatever happens at the meeting, and it's very hard to lead and be taking the notes and writing at the same time. So please remember to do that. I'm also going to say, I'm so with you on time. I think it is the most disrespectful thing to say the meeting's going to start at 9:30 and we don't start till 9:40 because some people are late coming in. And conversely, if the meeting's done at 12, I expect the meeting to be done at 12. You're in charge. Make the information fit the time frame that you've set. Jeff, I want to thank you for all of this important stuff. This is our first tiny training. I think it's gone very well. I hope Bradley thinks it's gone very well. Every time we come across something, I think it's going to be, or if you have suggestions for what you'd like to learn a little bit more about, I think we're going to get to do this in these very brief tiny trainings and see if we can talk about some of the things. I have to tell you, Jeff, what I've talked about here, most of this is stuff I've learned in the last 8 months because I have been forced to learn how to do better Zoom meetings and how to make them more personal. I always kind of knew that, start and end on time, but to do that in the context of these new technologies we're using is ever more challenging. So I want to thank you for the idea of doing this together. It's been really fun to do this together. I want to thank Bradley as well. He always makes us, whenever we're on camera, look fabulous and sound even smarter. Thank you, Bradley. Jeff, you want to say goodbye?
I do want to say goodbye. And on the way out the door, I'll remind everybody, purposeful meeting, have that agenda. And by the way, on the way out here, make sure you always have next steps in place. Okay, have whatever notes you have, make sure there are next steps in place. So everybody knows when they come out of that meeting, okay, we did this for a reason, and now we're going to progress by taking these next steps so that we know when we get together again, we'll have made progress. So thanks. I'm happy to do this with you, Deborah and Bradley, whenever you guys want. Thank you.